I keep my beauty crown in a velvet box that hasn't been opened in months. 60 years have taught me that some victories cost more than defeats. Tonight, as rain taps against my bedroom window, I find myself reaching for that familiar weight again. The gold feels colder now, but the memories it carries burn just as bright as they did 40 years ago. I didn't know then that winning would destroy everyone I loved. I was 20 then, living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with Mama, Daddy, and my brother Jerome. The wallpaper was peeling near the kitchen window, and the floorboards creaked secrets we all pretended not to hear. We had nothing but dreams and each other, or so I thought. The beauty pageant was Mama's idea. 3 months of preparation we couldn't afford. Daddy working double shifts, Jerome selling his guitar for my evening gown. Mama taught me to walk in heels using our narrow hallway. Mama taught me to walk in heels using our narrow hallway. When I won Miss Georgia 1983, the crown felt like salvation. The local newspaper called me a diamond in the rough, and for the first time in my memory, our phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews, photographers wanted pictures, and modeling agencies wanted meetings. But that night, when I placed the crown on our kitchen table between Mama's coffee cup and Daddy's work gloves, something shifted in the air like a storm approaching. Daddy's eyes changed that night, not with pride, but with something hungrier. "Girl, you're gonna make us rich," he whispered, holding the crown like it was made of real diamonds. I should have heard the warning in his voice, but I was too young, too hopeful. I thought beauty was a gift. I didn't know it could become a prison. The offers started immediately. Photo shoots, appearances, small modeling contracts. Daddy quit his job at the factory and appointed himself my manager. Jerome dropped out of college to handle my business affairs. Mama just smiled and counted the money as it rolled in. Daddy booked me for appearances I was too young for, at clubs where men's eyes followed me like hungry wolves. When I protested, Jerome would remind me about the family debt, about Mama's medication, about how selfish I was being. They kept my earnings in an account I couldn't touch, promising it was for my future. Daddy started gambling, coming home at sunrise with bourbon on his breath and empty pockets. Jerome bought a flashy car and expensive clothes, strutting around town like he'd earned them himself. Mama stopped cooking family dinners, too busy counting money that seemed to disappear as quickly as it came. And then there was Merrick. I met Merrick at a church social 3 months before the crown changed everything. He read poetry, worked at his uncle's auto shop, and never asked me to be anything other than myself. "You don't need to be Miss Georgia around me," he said. "Just be Eleanor." When he'd pick me up in his old Ford truck, I felt like the girl I used to be. I was falling in love with him, the kind of love that grows quiet and deep, like roots finding water. But some kinds of love aren't strong enough to survive the weight of other people's greed. "That boy ain't good enough for Miss Georgia," he'd say, blocking the doorway when Merrick came calling. But I snuck out anyway, meeting Merrick at the diner downtown where we'd share milkshakes and plan a future that seemed possible then. One night, I came home to find Merrick's truck parked crooked in our driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Daddy and Jerome standing over him, their shadows dark against the yellow light. Merrick's lip was bleeding, and his poetry book lay torn on the floor. "You stay away from my daughter." Daddy's voice carried through the thin walls. "She's got a future ahead of her, and it don't include some grease monkey." "I love her," Merrick said quietly, wiping blood from his mouth. "That should matter more than money." Daddy laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Love don't pay bills, boy. My daughter's gonna be somebody, and you're gonna drag her back down to nothing." I wanted to run inside to stop them, but my feet wouldn't move. Merrick looked up then and saw me in the window, watching like a ghost haunting her own life. The disappointment in his eyes was worse than any physical blow they could have given him. He gathered the torn pages of his book slowly, carefully. "Tell Eleanor," he said to my father, never breaking eye contact with me, "that some things are worth fighting for. Maybe she'll understand that someday." He drove away that night and never called me again. The family started crumbling after that. Daddy's gambling debts grew larger than my earnings could cover. Jerome got involved with loan sharks and men who conducted business in back alleys. They'd argue at all hours, their voices rising until the neighbors complained. Mama stopped taking sides and started taking pills instead. I tried to leave twice, but they'd find me and drag me back with promises that things would change. "We're family," Jerome would say, as if that word alone should be enough to make me forget the bruises on Marek's face, the emptiness in our bank account, the way they looked at me like I was nothing more than a meal ticket. What I didn't know then was that family can become the very thing that destroys you. The night everything fell apart, I was in my room, staring at the crown in its box. Voices exploded from the kitchen below. Daddy and Jerome screaming about money, about debts, about whose fault it was that everything had gone wrong. I heard chairs scraping, glass breaking, Mama crying for them to stop. Then there was a sound I'll never forget. A thud. Silence. Mama's scream. When the police arrived an hour later, Daddy was unconscious on the kitchen floor, blood pooling beneath his head. Jerome sat against the wall, his knuckles split, staring at nothing. The officers said Jerome claimed self-defense, that Daddy had come at him with a knife. But I saw Jerome's eyes that night. He wasn't defending himself. He was collecting on years of resentment. Daddy died 3 days later in the hospital. Jerome got 15 years for manslaughter. The worst part wasn't losing them. It was what Mama said as we sat in the funeral home, choosing flowers for a man who'd sold my childhood for gambling money. "This is all your fault," she whispered, not looking at me. "If you'd never won that crown, none of this would have happened. Our family would still be whole." Her words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. I left the next morning while she was sleeping, taking only the clothes in my suitcase, the crown, and enough money for a bus ticket to anywhere else. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. The bus took me to Atlanta, then to Memphis, finally to Chicago, where I met David. He was older, quiet, and never asked about my past. I met him at a small diner where I'd been working. David came in every Tuesday for 6 months before he finally asked my name. He was a widower who owned a small flower shop, a gentle man who spoke to roses like they were old friends. We married after 6 months, a small ceremony with his sister as witness, and a handful of customers who'd become like family. For 2 years, I thought I'd found peace. David never asked why I sometimes woke up crying, never questioned the velvet box I kept hidden in our bedroom closet. He simply held me when the nightmares came, made me tea when sleep wouldn't return, and taught me that love could be quiet and steady like morning light. I learned to arrange flowers under his patient guidance, discovered that my hands could create beauty without a crown to validate it. The shop became my sanctuary, the sweet smell of jasmine, the cool touch of petals, the satisfaction of creating something lovely for someone else's special day. Then a heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning in March, right there among the daffodils we'd been planting for spring. I found him when I came in from the market, surrounded by yellow blooms and dirt from the pots he'd been arranging. His face was peaceful, like he'd simply decided to rest for a moment among his flowers. The grief was different than anything I'd known before, clean and whole, without the jagged edges of betrayal that had marked my family's destruction. I never remarried, never had children, made good friends, built a simple life, learned to find joy in small things, the smell of roses, the sound of rain, customers who became like family. The flower shop sustained me for 37 years. I watched neighborhoods change around me, saw young couples become parents and then grandparents, witnessed celebrations and mourning in equal measure. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between customers, I still wondered if I was hiding or healing. I became the woman people turned to for comfort. They'd come in needing arrangements for funerals, and somehow end up telling me their stories. The years softened me. I was beautiful in a different way now, the kind of beauty that comes from surviving. But I kept the crown all these years, moving it from house to house like a secret I couldn't tell. Sometimes I wonder if I should have thrown it away, let it rust in some dumpster behind a gas station. Other times I think it's the only proof that any of it really happened, that I was beautiful once, that I mattered, even if it destroyed everything I thought I loved. Tonight, as I hold it in my aging hands, the gold catches the lamplight and throws tiny rainbows across my bedroom wall. The crown is smaller than I remember, more delicate. Time has dulled some of its shine, and one of the artificial diamonds has a crack running through its center like a tiny lightning bolt. I run my fingers over its familiar contours, the way the metal curves at the temples, the small dents where it was dropped once during a rushed photo shoot, the spot where Jerome had grabbed it too roughly when showing it off to his friends. Even damaged, it's still beautiful. Even carrying all this history, it still catches light. I think about Marek sometimes, wonder if he ever married, if he had children who loved poetry the way he did. 3 years ago, I hired a private investigator. She found that he'd opened his own shop in Savannah, married a teacher, raised 2 daughters who both became doctors. He died peacefully last spring, surrounded by family who loved him. Part of me was relieved to learn he'd found happiness. Another part mourned the life we might have built together. I think about Mama more often than I care to admit, whether she's still alive, whether she ever forgave me. The investigator couldn't find any trace of her after 1987. She disappeared completely. Sometimes I imagine calling out her name in grocery stores. Other times, I'm grateful for the silence. Jerome was released after serving 12 years. He found me once, showed up at the flower shop on a rainy Thursday in 1999. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes still held that same hungry look I remembered. "I've been clean for 6 years," he said, standing awkwardly among the roses. "Working construction, got a little apartment. Thought maybe we could," he gestured helplessly at the space between us. "Some bridges burned so completely that even time can't rebuild them." I listened while he talked about prison, about the man he claimed to have become. When he finished, I handed him a small arrangement of white carnations. "These are for Daddy's grave," I said quietly. "If you want to make things right, start there." He never came back. Mostly I think about the girl I was before the crown changed everything. She's still in here somewhere, buried beneath 40 years of quiet living and careful choices. She still believes in love, in second chances, in the possibility that beauty might be about more than what shows on the surface. The rain has stopped now, and moonlight streams through my curtains. I close the velvet box with a soft click and return it to its place in my dresser drawer, next to the few photos I have left from my old life. Tomorrow I'll close the flower shop for the last time. At 77, my hands shake too much. The new owners don't know about the crown. They see me as Eleanor the flower lady. But tonight, for the first time since I was 20, I'm tired of carrying this alone. Then I remember Mama's words, "This is all your fault." Some stories are better left untold. The crown can wait until tomorrow. Tonight I'm just Eleanor, sleeping peacefully in a house filled with the ghosts of choices I can't unmake. But as I turn off the lamp, I make a decision I've been avoiding for 47 years. Tomorrow, after I close the shop for the final time, I'm going to drive to Riverside Cemetery where David is buried. I'm going to sit beside his headstone with that velvet box in my lap, and I'm going to tell him everything I never had the courage to say while he was alive. David always said that flowers bloom best when they're planted in truth, watered with honesty, and given room to grow in the light. Maybe it's time I gave my own story the same chance. The moonlight shifts across my dresser, and for just a moment, the shadow of the jewelry box looks like a crown lying open on my nightstand. Tomorrow, I think, tomorrow I'll finally set it down.